Have you ever noticed how people treat you completely differently the moment you stop expecting anything from them? They don't apologize more. They don't suddenly become loyal. They simply reveal who they've always been. And here's what's fascinating. The version of them you thought you knew, that was just a projection, a character they played because you handed them the script. Now imagine if you rewrote the entire play, if you expected nothing, demanded everything, and stopped confusing hope with strategy. What do you think would happen? That's where the real game begins. When you expect loyalty, gratitude, consistency from people, you're not being optimistic. You're being delusional. And Niccolò Machiavelli knew this 5 centuries ago when he wrote those cold, surgical words. People are ungrateful, fickle, and disloyal. Now, before you close this video thinking it's just cynical philosophy, let me tell you something. This isn't pessimism. This is liberation. Because once you truly accept this truth, once you stop building your entire emotional architecture on the fantasy that people will return what you give them, everything shifts. The disappointment ends. The betrayal stops surprising you. And suddenly, you're no longer a victim of human nature. You become its master. You've been raised on beautiful lies. Treat people well and they'll treat you well. Be loyal and loyalty will return. Give your best and people will appreciate you. And so you went into the world with your heart open, your expectations high, and your trust freely distributed like candy at a parade. Then what happened? You got used. You got forgotten. You gave and gave until you were empty, and the moment you needed something back. Silence. Excuses. Suddenly everyone was too busy, too complicated, too wrapped up in their own drama to remember your name. But here's a truth that perhaps no one has told you with this brutal clarity. Most people don't betray you because they're evil. They betray you because they can, because you made it easy, because you expected them to be different than what they are. You confused their temporary gratitude for permanent loyalty. You mistook their momentary need for you as genuine connection. And when circumstances changed, when you were no longer useful, when the cost of staying loyal exceeded the benefit, they simply moved on. Not because you weren't worthy, but because that's what people do. Do you know why this keeps happening? Because you're operating with a fundamentally flawed strategy. You're playing chess while assuming everyone else is playing with the same rules, the same honor, the same integrity you have. But they're not. Most people are playing a completely different game, one where loyalty is conditional, gratitude is temporary, and commitment lasts exactly as long as it serves their interests. Carl Jung understood this from a different angle. He spoke about projection, about how we see in others what we want to see, not what's actually there. We project our own values onto them. We assume they think like us, care like us, operate from the same moral framework. And this projection becomes a blindfold that keeps us perpetually shocked by predictable human behavior. But Machiavelli, he ripped that blindfold off completely. He said, look at humans as they are, not as you wish they were. And what he saw wasn't pretty. He saw that people act grateful when they need you. They appear loyal when it costs them nothing. They seem devoted when circumstances align with their interests. But change the variables, change the power dynamic, the resources, the social landscape. Watch how quickly that gratitude evaporates like morning dew. And here's the mechanism you don't see. Every time you expect consistency from people, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Because consistency requires effort, sacrifice, sometimes loss. And most humans will always choose their comfort over your expectations. Always. This isn't cruelty. It's biology. It's survival instinct. It's the same mechanism that makes a dog loyal to whoever feeds it, regardless of who fed it yesterday. Think about your own life. How many people swore they'd be there forever? How many promised undying loyalty, eternal gratitude, permanent friendship? Now count how many actually stayed when staying became inconvenient. when you couldn't offer what you once did, when you needed them more than they needed you. The number is probably uncomfortably small, isn't it? This is why Machiavelli's insight cuts so deep. It's not theoretical philosophy. It's observed reality documented across centuries of human behavior. From ancient Rome to modern corporations, from family dynamics to political alliances, the pattern is identical. People are reliable only when being reliable serves them. But most people can't accept this. They'd rather keep getting hurt, keep getting disappointed, keep cycling through the same betrayals while insisting, no, people are fundamentally good. I just keep choosing wrong. But what if you're not choosing wrong? What if you're just expecting something that doesn't naturally exist? Now we need to go deeper into territory that will make you uncomfortable. Because understanding that people are ungrateful, fickle, and disloyal is just the surface. The real question is, why do you keep expecting otherwise? What wound are you trying to heal by believing in human consistency? What childhood narrative are you still playing out? Jung would say you're stuck in the persona, that social mask we create to be accepted. Part of that mask requires believing in the goodness of human connection, because to question it feels like questioning your place in the social fabric. We're tribal creatures. We need to believe the tribe will protect us, value us, remember us. But that belief becomes a prison when it's no longer based on reality. Sigmund Freud approached it differently. He'd say you're repeating unconscious patterns, trying to get from strangers what you didn't get from your first caregivers. Unconditional acceptance, reliable presence, consistent love. So you keep giving, hoping this time it will work, this time they'll stay, this time they'll prove different, but they won't. Because you're using people to resolve internal conflicts that have nothing to do with them. Here's the cruelest point, and Machiavelli understood this viscerally. The more you expect from people, the more power you give them over your emotional state. Your happiness becomes hostage to their choices. Your peace depends on their loyalty. Your sense of worth hinges on their gratitude. You've essentially handed your entire psychological sovereignty to beings who are, by nature, self-interested and changeable. And what happens to someone who lives this way? They become resentful, bitter. They develop this low-grade anger that never quite resolves because they can't accept the fundamental truth. You cannot control human nature, but you keep trying. Do you know what the most exhausting part of life is? It's not work, it's not challenges. It's the constant disappointment of expecting people to meet standards they never agreed to. You created an entire fantasy about how relationships should work, how loyalty should function, how gratitude should manifest, and then you hold people accountable to agreements that only existed in your head. But there's something even more insidious happening. When you expect consistency from others, you become manipulable. Because smart operators, the Machiavellian minds who actually understand human nature, they see your expectations coming from miles away, and they use them against you. They know you expect loyalty, so they perform loyalty just long enough to get what they need. They know you expect gratitude, so they thank you profusely while planning their exit. They know you expect consistency, so they create an illusion of stability until circumstances change. You think you're building real connections. They know they're managing a temporary alliance. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the prince needing to understand human nature better than human nature understands itself. The person who accepts fickleness as default isn't cynical. They're strategic. They're not surprised by betrayal. They planned for it. They didn't invest their entire emotional portfolio in one person's goodness. They diversified. Now stop and think. How many times have you been absolutely shattered by someone's disloyalty? How many times have you said, "I never thought they'd do this to me"? Every single time you were operating from expectation rather than observation. You expected consistency. Reality delivered fickleness. You expected gratitude. Reality delivered indifference. You expected loyalty. Reality delivered self-interest. And here's what really happens in those moments. You don't just lose the person, you lose your faith in people. You lose your ability to trust. You become guarded, cynical, closed. And then you hate yourself for becoming that way, because it feels like they turned you into something you never wanted to be. But what if that's not what happened? What if you simply woke up? What if the cynicism you fear is actually clarity? What if expecting nothing isn't pessimism, but profound wisdom? Jung spoke about the shadow, that part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. And one of the biggest shadows in modern psychology is this. We don't want to accept that love, loyalty, and gratitude are almost always conditional. We want to believe in the fairy tale of unconditional human connection. But that fairy tale is killing us softly, disappointment by disappointment, betrayal by betrayal. Machiavelli forces you to look at your shadow. He says, stop pretending people are angels. They're not demons either. They're humans. And humans respond to incentives, consequences, power dynamics, and self-interest. Sometimes that self-interest aligns with treating you well. Sometimes it doesn't. Neither says anything about your worth. The person who truly understands this stops taking betrayal personally. They're not shocked when the loyal employee jumps to a competitor for more money. They're not devastated when the devoted friend disappears during hard times. They're not surprised when gratitude has a 3-month expiration date. They expected nothing, so they lost nothing. But here's what they gained. Freedom, complete emotional freedom. Because when you expect nothing from people, you can appreciate everything they do, give without building your identity around it. That friend who shows up? Wonderful. They disappear tomorrow. Expected. Your peace remains untouched. This is the Machiavellian path to psychological sovereignty. Not through believing in people despite evidence, but through accepting people as they are and structuring your life accordingly. So how do you actually live this? How do you expect nothing while still functioning in a world that requires connection, cooperation, trust? Because that's the real challenge, isn't it? You can't become a hermit. You can't operate in pure isolation. You need people. The question is, how do you need them without needing them to be different than they are? First, you have to completely restructure your relationship with expectation itself. This is not about becoming cold or cynical. This is about becoming strategically detached. Think of it like this. You can enjoy a sunny day without expecting the weather to stay perfect forever. You can appreciate a good meal without expecting the restaurant to exist eternally. You can value a moment without demanding it become a permanent condition. Apply that same logic to people. Someone is loyal today. Enjoy it today. Someone shows gratitude. Receive it without building a narrative about who they are. Someone seems devoted. Accept it as a current state, not a permanent trait. Because people, like weather, change. And the person who expects consistency from inherently changeable beings is setting themselves up for perpetual suffering. Carl Jung called this living in the present without the weight of projection. You see people as they show up right now, not as you need them to be, not as they promised they'd be, not as they were 6 months ago. Right now, this moment, that's all the data you have, that's all the data you should trust. But here's where it gets practical, almost ruthlessly so. Machiavelli taught that the wise prince creates systems that account for human nature rather than fight against it. He doesn't build his kingdom on people's goodness. He builds it on clear consequences, obvious benefits, and structural incentives. You need to do the same with your personal life. Stop giving without limits because you expect reciprocity. Start giving strategically to people who demonstrate, through repeated action over time, that they're capable of reciprocity. Notice I said demonstrate, not promise. Words are free. Actions cost something. Pay attention to what people do when doing the right thing is inconvenient for them. That's your data. Stop expecting loyalty as default. Start start creating conditions where loyalty makes sense for the other person. This isn't manipulation. This is understanding human psychology. If someone stays in your life only because you keep proving your value, keep making their stay worthwhile, that's not real loyalty. But it is real connection, and maybe that's all that exists. Here's something uncomfortable. Maybe lifelong loyalty is a myth we tell ourselves. Maybe all relationships are actually a series of daily choices to stay based on continued mutual benefit. And maybe that's okay. Maybe expecting more is where the problem lies. Think about it. Even the most devoted parent experiences moments of resentment, doubt, exhaustion with their children. Even the most committed partners have days where they question everything. Feelings are not constant. Circumstances change. People evolve. The only loyalty that exists is the choice, made repeatedly, to continue choosing someone despite those fluctuations. So, expecting unwavering loyalty? That's fantasy. But you can expect behavioral patterns. You can observe consistency over time. You can notice who stays when circumstances get difficult versus who only appears during your abundance. Now here's the transformation part, the part where this philosophy becomes empowering rather than depressing. When you expect nothing, you become immune to disappointment. But more than that, you become dangerous in the best possible way. Dangerous to manipulators, to users, to people who exploit others' expectations. Why? Because you're no longer playing their game. The person who manipulates through guilt needs you to feel obligated, but you don't. The person who controls through fear of abandonment needs you to fear being alone, but you don't. The person who leverages your hope for loyalty needs you to keep believing, but you don't. Your expectationless presence becomes a mirror that reflects people's true nature back to them, and most people can't handle that mirror. They want you to stay in the fantasy, to keep believing in permanent bonds, to keep investing in loyalty they never intend to return. When you stop, when you pull back your energy and simply observe, they reveal themselves completely. Machiavelli understood that the greatest power isn't in controlling others. It's in being uncontrollable yourself. And you become uncontrollable the moment you stop needing people to be anything other than what they naturally are. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes crucial. You cannot become whole, cannot become truly yourself, while your emotional state depends on others' consistency. Individuation requires you to build your identity, your peace, your sense of worth from internal sources, not from how people treat you, how long they stay, how grateful they are. But let's be honest, this is terrifying for most people. Because if you don't get your worth from others' validation, where do you get it from? If you don't measure success by how many people stay loyal, what do you measure it by? If you don't define love by consistency, what is love? These are the questions that will surface as you make this transformation, and they should, because you're deconstructing an entire framework you've used your whole life. You're learning to stand alone in your own value, regardless of who acknowledges it. You're building psychological sovereignty from the ground up. And here's what will happen. Some people will panic. The ones who depended on your expectations, who knew you'd always be there, who counted on your belief in loyalty to keep you committed when they offered nothing back, they'll feel your shift immediately. And they'll try to pull you back in. They'll accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, of not being the person you used to be. And you know what? They're right. You're not that person anymore. That person was a victim of their own beautiful illusions. This person is awake. You'll also lose people. That's guaranteed. Because relationships built on your expectations cannot survive your expectationless presence. The friend who stayed because you needed them to will leave when you stop needing. The partner who relied on your hope will exit when you stop hoping. The family member who exploited your obligation will disappear when you release obligation. And this is where it gets lonely. Not forever, but for a while. because you're in transition between two worlds, the world where you believed in people's consistency and the world where you see them clearly. Most people live in that first world. You're moving to the second. That's a solo journey. But in that solitude, something profound happens. You start to meet yourself without the distortion of others' projections. You begin to understand your actual values, not the ones you adopted to make people stay. You discover what you genuinely want, not what you thought you should want, based on social narratives about loyalty and connection. This is the Machiavellian path, merged with Jungian wisdom. Accept human nature as it is. Build your life around that acceptance, and in doing so, paradoxically, you become more capable of genuine connection than you ever were before. Because now, when someone shows up, you're not measuring them against impossible standards. You're appreciating them for what they are. Now, when someone leaves, you're not shattered by broken expectations. You're accepting the natural flow of human relationships. Now, when someone betrays you, you're not questioning your worth. You're adjusting your strategy. What does life look like on the other side of this transformation? It looks like freedom wrapped in clarity, dressed in strategic compassion. You wake up without the weight of wondering if people will stay, if they'll remember you, if they'll return what you gave. You know they might not. You planned for it. Your peace doesn't depend on their choices. You interact with people without the hidden scoreboard running in your head, tallying who owes you what, who's been loyal long enough, who's shown sufficient gratitude. You gave because you chose to. Their response is data, not debt. You build your life on systems and self-sufficiency rather than on human consistency. You create income that doesn't depend on one client's loyalty. You develop identity that doesn't require others' validation. You generate meaning from within rather than from how many people show up. And here's what's beautiful. From this foundation, you actually become more capable of deep connection, not less. Because now you can love people without needing them to be perfect. You can value them without requiring permanence. You can appreciate loyalty without expecting it as default. The people who stay in your life after this transformation, they're there by choice, not by expectation. They're present because the relationship serves them in some way, and you're okay with that because it serves you too. There's no pretense, no performance, no fantasy of unconditional anything. Machiavelli would call this political wisdom applied to personal life. Jung would call this psychological maturity. I call it the only way to maintain your sanity in a world of changeable humans. You stop being shocked by fickleness. You stop being wounded by ingratitude. You stop being devastated by disloyalty. Not because you're numb, but because you never expected otherwise. And from that expectationless place, you command everything. Your time, your energy, your presence, your peace. You become the person who gives without strings, loves without conditions, connects without dependency. And paradoxically, this makes you magnetic. Because people can sense when someone doesn't need them to be anything other than what they are. That's rare. That's powerful. That's freedom. So if you've made it this far, you're ready for the real question. Will you continue expecting people to be consistent, loyal, grateful, setting yourself up for endless disappointment? Or will you accept Machiavelli's cold truth and build your life on reality rather than hope? Today, we learned from Machiavelli that people are ungrateful, fickle, and disloyal, not as a condemnation, but as liberation. We learned from Jung that projecting our values onto others keeps us trapped in cycles of disappointment. And we discovered that expecting nothing while commanding everything is not cynicism, it's mastery. If these insights sparked a moment of clarity for you, hit the like button to share this wisdom with others who need to hear it. Subscribe to join our community, where we dive deeper into life-changing ideas every week. This is a space for minds ready to see reality clearly, to stop pretending, to build psychological sovereignty. Write in the comments, I expect nothing I command everything. Let's see how many here are ready for this level of clarity. Until we meet again, carry these insights forward. Let Machiavelli's wisdom remind us. Reality is kinder than fantasy because reality, unlike hope, never disappoints. May you find our talks not only educational, but also inspirational, and hopefully, ultimately, transformational. See you next time.